The Pediatric Lounge, a podcast taking you behind the door of the physician's lounge to get a deeper insight into just what docs are talking about today. From the clinically profound to the wonderfully routine and everything in between. Morning, George. It's Tuesday morning, and we get to tape another podcast with two phenomenal guests today.
Yeah, today we're going to have a good old friend, Dr. Jesse Hackle, and a new friend, Ron Paprocki, like Rocky, JD. And the topic that we're going to discuss is a very interesting one, and it could be, we called it How to Get Ready for Retirement After a Career in Pediatrics, but I predict that this could be translated into any career in medicine. The theory goes is the same, not just for pediatrics. Take it away.
Jesse Hackle is a good friend of the show, and he's been on the show a couple of times. He is now retired from the exam room, but he's the chair of the American Academy Committee on Practice and Ambulatory Medicine and the immediate past president of New York AAP Chapter 3, as well as the co-chair of the Pediatric Council of New York AAP Chapters 2 and 3, where all the advocacy happens in New York. Ron is a lawyer and a certified financial planner. I met him in Tampa, Florida, with a very good friend of mine and his, Mr. Stillwell. Mr. Stillwell was the chief, I'm not going to say lobbyist, but governmental affairs officer for the American Medical Association for over 20 years. He oversaw their PAC and all of their legislative affairs at the state and the federal level. And at that time, Ron was doing all of the investment for physicians that were members of the American Medical Association and wanted to save for retirement or their foundational account. Him and his wife are delightful people that live in Chicago with their children, and he was hopefully going to bring a lot to the conversation today. Welcome, Ron, and welcome, Jesse.
Thank you. Thank you. A pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
So what are you doing now that you're retired?
Oh, it's not like I'm lacking for activity. As Herb said, I'm chairing the AAP's Committee on Practice and Ambulatory Medicine, which is possibly one of the busiest committees with the Academy, writing and reviewing all kinds of policy statements for the Academy and making sure that they can be implemented readily in the pediatric practice. Doing advocacy, particularly in New York State, and I do a fair amount of consulting on medical liability issues as well.
There's so much to ask you about what you're doing at the AAP, but that's
another episode. That's another episode.
Yes. Jazz, when do you think a pediatrician should start thinking about retirement?
And as you said, probably most people should start thinking about retirement when they start their first job. And I don't mean to suggest that means giving less than 100% to your job and thinking about the day you retire. But I do think it means that you need to start planning for a lot of the different aspects of retirement that end up being put in place based on the decisions you make early on in your career.
Yesterday I had this conversation with some medical students because we were talking about, I was looking over your podcast show notes, and they had asked me, when do you think we have to start thinking about retirement? They had no clue. And I thought to tell them, probably the moment you start working, because most people, office employers will give a 401k to young people, but I almost guarantee you the young people never put any money away.
Part of it, the financial aspects, I tend to look at the personal aspects, the life aspects that are involved throughout your career and will become especially prominent in retirement when you're no longer going to the office. And that includes things like where you want to be, what sort of life you envision, what you envision doing during your retirement years. As I said, I've been retired for 1.5 years, and I've got plenty to do, and I'm happy about it. But some of that is serendipity, but some of that was from planning and thinking about it in advance at the time I felt it was time to retire.
One of our senior physicians, he just retired about 5 years ago. I remember him telling me once, I'm never going to retire. You're going to come to work one day, you're going to find me hunched over this chair dead. Until about 78.
That was his retirement plan. That's okay.
That's absolutely right. And not everybody is going to retire, and that's okay. But I think one of the things that we like to think is keeping your options open. I had a partner who said the same thing, also retired. in his mid 70s. And was the kind of person who also felt that what he wanted to do was just continue working. But life changes and things change. And certainly the practice of pediatrics has changed. And there's a whole lot of pressures that make you want to rethink what you're doing on a regular basis. But if you don't plan for it early on, a lot of those options are closed out later on.
And then we've also heard when we interviewed Russ Libby, their retirement plan, the 3 senior partners that started the practice are all doing telemedicine now, and they love it. They just love it. And mid and junior associates at the practice love it because they have the time to do the more complex cases like the mental health or the obesity or the chronic illness that you don't have time when you got 30 patients to see one after the other. Happy medium for everybody. So that's also a way to do it. Ron, when should young people start thinking about retirement and why, just from investment point of view?
Again, I have to agree with the comments that were already offered. It's never too early to start doing the right thing. And it's so difficult when folks are young and in any occupation, they always think, oh, they have more time to take care of those things. I don't have to start saving now because we have little kids at home. I don't have to start saving now because it'll be easier to save money when the kids get a little bit older. Oh, I don't have to save money now because the kids are going to college soon. The things that you do early on can make a tremendous difference, not only from a financial perspective, but more importantly, from the perception of habits, developing good habits as far as how you manage your money, how you manage your income, and how you can help avoid what we refer to as a standard of living creep, which is just the idea that as people start out into a career, especially in medicine, they've been deprived for such a long time, and they may have friends of theirs that were in other professions that have been able to do or enjoy different things. Gosh, those physicians they sacrifice a lot early on, and they're ready to say, hey, I have to live a little bit here too. It's important to start early. We're pleased to be invited to different medical schools to actually deliver lectures to students and help them get a sense that this isn't tough stuff. It just takes a little bit of work early on. And the more that you can focus on that earlier in your career, there's so many more options from a financial perspective later as well. There's an old saying that I love. It's if you do the things you should do when you should do them, you can do the things you want to do when you want to do them. Start early, start often.
A personal perspective on that. It's 48 years ago that I started my residency. And back in the day, our salary was the grand old amount of $9,000 a year. So the first $9,000 a year. The first 6 months of my residency, July through to December, I earned $4,500. And you can be sure that $675 went into an IRA based on that first year. And it became a habit. It was something I did from year one. And the power of compounding, even on that initial investment, is not insignificant. But it's something that I did. And it's something that I taught my kids to do as well with their first jobs. And I think it is never too early.
So, Jess, you keep talking about thinking early, and there's a word you keep using, location. What do you mean by location when you're thinking about retirement?
Didn't do a lot of moving. We tended to go somewhere and settle down, put down roots, raise a family. And for a large degree, that was the area we stayed on. There is more mobility currently. People do tend to change jobs and change location. But if you're getting started in a practice, you're investing the time, the money, the effort to build a practice, that's likely to be an area that you call home for a significant amount of time. And it's important to plan not only to choose a location where you can have a prosperous practice, but also a location where when the practice is not what consumes your entire life, is someplace that you'll be happy to live in, either during your career, raising your kids, or especially during retirement. Sure, you can move, but when you think about what you've invested in the community after many years, it should be an area that you're happy with and you enjoy.
Okay. And then there's all sort of things to think about, right? Like partnership buyout agreements and what to do if a partner dies, both a partner in your practice or a partner like your life partner, your romantic partner,
Sure.
when you're starting to think about these things early on. And I don't think we like to think of these things.
No, but it's important to plan for everything. There are some things we know are going to happen. You're going to be offered a contract. You're going to be offered a certain amount of job security. You're going to be joining a practice possibly where you will become a party to a partnership agreement or a stockholders agreement. And those are things to consider when you first sign them, because the terms that you sign into are things that are going to impact your decisions later on in life. And that's why I think that from your very first contract, you need to be considering retirement. Is your contract something that provides a plan for retirement that you consider acceptable and that you will still consider to acceptable 20 or 30 or 40 years down the line? Obviously, working with your family and your partner and determining your choices here is important as well. But what you mentioned, Herb, was something that I call the unknown aspects of retirement. You can be in a practice and going on smoothly. Everything is working well and everybody's happy with the terms and the arrangements when your senior partner decides he's had enough and so it's time to go. Or somebody gets sick, or unfortunately, somebody suddenly dies and the practice has to come to terms with the changes. Now, it's really important to make sure early on that you've got a contract and that you've got an agreement that allows for responding to these sudden changes. Because while nobody likes to plan for them, we do have to face the reality that they sometimes happen. And if you're left with unclear arrangements about retirement or stepping down or going part-time, then there'll be tension developing at the time these things are happening. And that can be made a lot smoother if you plan for it in advance.
Right.
Yeah, particularly, maybe Ron can expand on this, the role of life insurance on key officers in your corporation, because it's very sad when a partner dies and the practice doesn't have any money to give the family as a buyout, and nobody had ever considered that possibility.
Absolutely. That's why we think that the foundation of a good financial structure is to begin with the appropriate hazard plannings and hazards, the things that no one wants to have happen but can happen. The idea of unexpected death or a disability, having the right type of insurance coverage and the right type of legal documents, wills, trusts, estate planning, as well as if there is an equity ownership in the practice, so critical to make certain that there are the right types of buyout arrangements to take care of that partner. So you're able to make a reasonable purchase of that interest. And oftentimes that's viewed as a way to supplement capital that would have otherwise been available to that family had the physician continued to work. Insurance, I think, often gets a bad rap because too often it's presented as an investment. Insurance is not an investment. Generally, it's a pretty bad investment. But investments are terrible insurance. They're two different things, and you just have to look at them based on what your personal objectives are, what the objectives are not only of your family, but also your professional family too, and say, what do we want to accomplish here as a group? And in an era where there is a lot more transition as far as length of time in roles, we're hearing numbers that the average first-year position, the tenure usually is about 3 to 4 years before someone moves on to a new role. Boy, I have to imagine that's a different world than it was 20 or 30 years ago. So it's just the idea of laying out the appropriate objectives and goals and making certain that you take care of those preparing for those hazards first. Very fundamental first step, all leading to what we think is the pinnacle of retirement planning. And that's retirement planning to us really makes up of two things. Number one, independence, the ability to do what you want to do when you want to do it. And number two, besides independence, is dignity. And that's the ability to do the things you want to do in the manner you wish. And Herb, when we met in the Tampa area, it was great to get together, but it was even more special to get together at a special place, great food, great conversation, it's a combination of those things. It's the experiences and the manner in which you want to accomplish those. I've hopped ahead to the end result from hazard planning, but hazards are key. And to bring it back, we think that's definitely an important piece, not only personally for your family, but your professional family as well.
Is that because Ron spoke about the personal and the family of a partner who's retiring or taken ill or disabled or died, but also consider from the point of view of the practice. When you have an ongoing practice, you want to make sure it continues to go and continues to survive and thrive, even when the leaders have changed. And appropriate funding for that is important to not place a great financial strain on the practice, having to buy out a partner who's retired or passed away.
No, I have a story to tell about a practice that was really great. Had some great leadership. One of the great leaders in the practice passed away. They had made some poor business decisions and they had a line of credit that was pretty big. So the practice owed money. The physician passed away. They had life insurance for that physician, gave it over to the family. But they didn't take care of the liabilities in the practice. So they let the first partner get away with it. And the second one passed away. Same problem. And that line of credit got even bigger. And then the practice imploded.
Jess, and what do you mean by mid-career? Especially physicians were very smart at one thing.
Working.
Well, depends. Pediatricians are very good at taking care of children. Neurosurgeons are very good at opening your skull. And so how do you balance that super talent that most physicians have with other things that are not what you do in the exam room or the operating room?
It's important to realize that, yes, we're experts at what we've trained to do and what we do. And most of us love what we do. And that's why we do it and why we do it so intensively and spend so much time doing it. But at the same time, there is more to life. And taking care of kids or opening skulls or anything such as that. And the really balanced physician is one who has other interests that occupy the time, that occupy the mind, that provide refreshment and pause and a chance to reset based on our current, what we do currently. So it's really important, especially after the beginning. When I tend to look at the career, I tend to divide it into three sections: early, mid, and late career. Early career is the first 5 or 10 years when you're either building a practice from scratch or joining a group and establishing yourself and building a patient panel and taking on more responsibilities in leadership of the practice, while at the same time, you're probably also starting and building a family. Late career is what we talk about when we're talking about an established practice or a senior person who's starting to think about retiring. So mid-career is that middle 10 or 20 years of your practice. Things are going smoothly. Your practice is doing what you want it to do. Your experience is what you want it to be. That's the time when you can sit back a little and look and say, what else is there? Who else am I besides a physician? What's important to me in the grand scope of things? And even to ask the question, if I couldn't go into the office every day, what would I want my life to look like? If you don't look at that early on when you're in your 40s or your 50s, waiting till your 60s or even later to look at that is going to be more of a struggle because things will have changed. Your options will have changed. Possibly your health will have changed. And so it's late to plan on that. So that's what I look at as the mid-career, when things are established and you have the freedom and the flexibility to start looking at the other parts of your life, taking it all as a whole.
Jesse, Herb and I would be considered mid-career or late career?
I don't exactly know how many years you guys have been.
Herb's been around for a long time.
How old you guys?
I'm 58, going to be 59, and he's 58.
Guys are what I would consider transitioning between mid-career and late career. If you look at retirement age for pediatricians, you find it ranges anywhere from the 60s to the 70s. You're getting to the point where you've been in established practices and settings. You're doing things that have been what people would call successful. You're satisfied. You're pleased with the career trajectory. But at some point, you may want to say, it's time for me to change what I'm doing, to be a little less involved on the day-to-day clinical and a little bit more involved in thinking about what else I enjoy doing. And George, you've got the guitars behind you. You clearly got other interests that take up your time and that occupy them. And you're, whether it was intentional or not, you're in a position where you have other things that you enjoy doing. And I don't know you as well, Herb, about that sort of thing. But as we approach our 60s, a lot of stuff changes. Kids are out of the house, college is done, your expenses are generally less, at least the ones that are required. You may decide to travel more and things like that, but you can start to think about slowing down on the practice as a tool of generating revenue. You continue to think of it as a tool for generating personal satisfaction, but you also want to think about other things that generate personal satisfaction for you. People who say, I'm going to practice till the day I drop dead in the office are unfortunately people who often don't have other things that interest. And anybody who wants to keep practicing forever should be able to do so, but I don't like to think that people are forced to do so because they have no other options.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, you're getting at the point where you're going to start to think about a transition.
Oh, thank you. Herb, you're old.
Guys, I'm old.
Ron, how do you help people answer those questions? Who am I? And I may be 35, 40 years old. Who will I be when I'm 70 if I get to 70?
Great question. And the way that we do this, and then I'll share some anonymous examples that we had, is that we like to dig into more when we chat with our clients and help our clients. Yes, we're interested in the accounts they have and how much they can save and what their tax return looks like and what their will looks like and things like that. But much more important than that is to create a good understanding and perhaps plant a few seeds for them to consider that will address a lot of the things that Jesse has mentioned. And what are your values? What are your interests? What are your goals? What other advisors do you have that work with you? Tell me about your relationships with the people you work with. Tell me about the relationships you have with your family. Tell me about the relationships that you have in the community. Are you a volunteer? Does your partner volunteer? Does your spouse volunteer? Do you encourage that for your kids? What books do you read? What movies did you see? And it's just so much fun to start. On the one hand, when we speak with people and we say, what are your values? And if you get that deer in the headlight look, like, I never thought about what my values should be, tell me about it. Why haven't you done that? Or what do you think would be the benefit? It plants the seed to get the wheels turning to begin to think about those things. And I think about some of the people that I would put in the most successful retired lifestyles are people not that have the most amount of money or that spend the most or travel the most, but they started these types of things when they were in mid to late mid-career. And not that they were actually doing them, but it's like they're putting together a little punch list to say, this is something I want to explore. This is something that I want to look into. Maybe I can't do it all right now, but that's on my to-do list to explore. And I think literature, and there are different studies that will talk about phases of a career and phases of retirement as well. And you don't have to be retired to start to explore those things. You may need to have a little bit more time to explore that in depth, but to discover a potential interest, it's a great way to do that. And I think those types of conversations are really critical. And it's just, we've had clients tell us they're just the best questions that we've never thought that we would be asked of by a financial person. In our world, finance is a means to help you accomplish what's really key. And the more we understand of what is really key, the better off we think that people can be. So again, I just think of the most successful, financially successful retired people. So many different interests, have done so many great things with some of their children or grandchildren. They've traveled as a family. They've traveled alone, traveled with friends. They've explored interest. These are all things that they started thinking about when they were in that mid or late mid career stage. I hope that helps.
What's interesting? I should be the poster boy for physician burnout because I do a lot of things, but I'm not. I have a lot of outlets. I play guitar, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff. Do the podcast. I do everything. Herb knows. Yet I have not found anything that actually generates income other than seeing patients, the office. Everything costs money. So
you've got your day job, and that's what will provide for you to do those other things, both now while you're working and importantly later on. And that's where the financial planning comes in and the savings come in. And I love the idea that Ron, as a financial planner, asks questions about who you are and what your interests are and where you see you're going. Because I tell you, most of us are so focused on what we're doing in medicine that we don't get that question. We certainly don't self-examine enough to ask it ourselves. If you're fortunate and have family members who can ask you that sort of question and set you up. My dad was an accountant and an attorney and worked with a lot of people who he saw without that kind of planning and thinking for what the rest of their life would be like. And he inculcated that in us, is that, yes, you have a career, but your career is who you are. It's a part of who you are. And not everything we do has to generate revenue. Yeah, we need the income to live and to do what we want to do. But other stuff is important to generate satisfaction, to generate interest, to help keep us growing, if you will, as people. And that's the stuff that you do, George. And what pays for it is your day job. Again, that's a good balance to have.
So I'm going to push back a little bit about George. I don't see George ever retiring. He loves to manage that office. And I think if you take the office away from him, he would just wither away like a plant without water. And
I don't see that at all. No, and George, as I do.
He's not going to retire. We can make a gentleman's bet now. But also, he makes enough money. So he's now at the perfect place where he's been careful. George is a very careful person. Same house, same wife, same practice, steady, and which you don't see very much in the young people. And now he's got plenty of income and he can explore other things that don't need to make him income. They give him pleasure. That podcast is a perfect example of that. It's just something we really enjoy doing. And we love having these conversations. But we're not going to become Joe Rogans. That's not in the planning. But it gives us pleasure. And that's part of our retirement planning, is an outlet for something else that keeps us connected with our peers and that we feel is contributing to the community. We all do it different ways.
Yeah.
I do have a place where I disagree with you, Jesse. You say you should start thinking about succession planning late career. And I'm interested as if I'm misunderstanding that, because I think you should start doing that very early in your career.
Understand. I think succession planning is a part of your contracts and your partnership agreements from day one. And that's why I was talking about early on, knowing what your contract specifies in terms of becoming a partner, but knowing what it also specifies in terms of people who are leaving a practice. Now, what you're doing there is setting up a framework. You're not dealing with the specific details. If you're joining a practice and after a couple of years you become a part owner of the practice, the succession planning needs to be written into the documents. But it won't do, obviously, is decide on who you're going to choose to replace a retiree partner 30 years later. So you need the framework that's adaptable and that can spring into action, if you will, when somebody retires or gets disabled or passes on. If you don't have that framework, the time to create it is not going to be when you're suddenly looking for somebody new to join a practice, to replace somebody and keep it going. My feeling about succession planning is that it has to be a part of the planning from very early on.
Okay. And then there's a more precise succession planning when you're, I don't know, when you decide you're going to retire in the next 5 years and you're the managing partner of the practice, then you have to start talking to your partners about who has the ability and affability and willingness to take on your job as you leave, which is a different a more specific succession planning.
And that's something that you can put the framework in place again, but you can't really plan for what's going to happen. And I managed practice for most of my 41 years in that practice. And when it came time for me to retire, I transitioned slowly. I went to part-time for about 3.5 years before I fully retired. And during that time, I continued to do management, but I looked for ways to shift the management responsibilities. The other partners in the practice were unwilling or unable to take those on. So we ended up joining with a larger group that had people who were managing the practice for themselves and could transition to taking over the management of our practice as well. You can't force somebody to do a job that they don't feel qualified or able or even interested in doing. So you've got to have other options in place. And we had that other group arrangement in place for a number of years that when it became time for the actual management to be taken over, there were people in place who were interested in doing it.
Great. Ron, how often do you see medical practices that are very successful, physicians that are very successful, and they've never thought about succession planning?
It is definitely a common occurrence, primarily because they're so focused on the idea of patient delivery, number one, and making certain that they're fulfilled in their professional world, that they tend to have a difficult time thinking of what will happen if I can't do blank. Sometimes there's the attitude of infallibility. Oh, that can't happen to me. I'll never get disabled. Although I may see that every day, that won't happen to me because I take care of myself, or whatever the thought might be. Again, I think that's built more on the idea of they needed to have that certain level of confidence in their profession, certain specialties more so than others. But the idea of, planning for an eventuality that probably won't happen to me, I don't know, that's really key to do. When they see that happen to a partner, that's usually the life-changing event that's going to make them come back and say, gosh, I wish we did this, not so much for me, but now look at the mess that I'm in, type of thing, which can be a motivating force as well. But the idea of not only having the right agreements in place, but making certain that you're hiring the right way and attracting the right types of partners that not only have the skill in the delivery of patient care, but have the interest or aptitudes to handle some of the management aspect. And Jesse, kudos to you to have basically what sounds like a plan B in store that came into play and worked out hopefully very well for everyone. Another alternative that we've seen a lot of smaller practices, solo practitioners, just getting acquired by a hospital group or the private equity groups that are rolling up practices. And it sounds wonderful. They tell me it's great once it happens. And to a person, 2 to 3 years into the relationship, they're happy people. They've lost the 3 most important things that we have found that physicians want to have. They want to be well remunerated. They want to have autonomy, and they want to have a good standing in the community. And that's more of a societal change, but the idea of physicians being held in a pedestal in the community is not quite the same that it was 30 or 40 years ago. But as a result of some of these acquisitions, they've lost a lot of autonomy. You've probably seen it in your practices too. Insurance companies have more to say about patient care sometimes than physicians do. That hurts. That robs people of a lot of drive and desire to do well. And the remuneration aspect, you see it, I'm sure. Your costs of doing business keep going up. Your reimbursements keep going down. That ain't a good formula for financial success in the long run. So I guess I've gotten a little off track with that.
No, I really appreciate you touched on private equity because I am not a fan of private equity. Private equity from a Wall Street point of view is a 5-year short-term investment on whatever you're buying. And your hope is that either it goes on an IPO into the market or you sell it to someone else and you give the money back to the limited partners. Pediatrics and I think internal medicine, family practice, We are long-term gamers. We become part of the community. We are here for 20 to 30 years. And so if you're telling me I have the work I need to do in 5 years, that's not possible. What we do for children today, vaccinating them, for example, for cervical cancer, but we're not going to see that come back to that woman, that girl that's 9 today is a woman in her 20s or 30s. And she doesn't have a cervical cancer. She doesn't have a miscarriage. She doesn't have an incompetent cervix. She doesn't have throat cancer. But that doesn't happen in 5 years. But is there a time where private equity could be helpful, Ron? For example, I'm 65. None of my partners want to take over the practice. And I am going to retire in the next 3 years, one way or the other, because I have plenty of money, I'm healthy, and I'm done. Is that an opportunity for the practice to survive?
Let's think of it in a couple of different perspectives. One, what's the objective of the soon to be retiring partner, number one? What are the objectives of the remaining partners, not only for themselves, but for their practice? And what obligation do they feel that they have as far as their patients or the community is concerned? And if the retiring physician is saying, I really have to take care of myself for whatever reason, right or wrong, good or bad. I just really have to focus on my own situation. And a private equity arrangement can really provide the capital to me that I haven't been able to accumulate during my life. Maybe that's the only out. And yeah, that can work for that particular physician. That could be looked at as a home run. The remaining physicians may say, what happens to us? Now we're part of this conglomerate. We don't want to be. What happens to our patients? What happens to what's the impact of all this? So it may be beneficial to one party, but it may not be beneficial to the other players that are involved. And so that's where, when we've seen this viewed initially as a win for the physician, it was, hey, it helped me because it gave me a buyout of my practice. I don't have to worry about some of the things I had to worry about before. All that's going to be taken care of by the hospital or by the organization or whatever. And then they come to find that there's different pressures. At least those that we've worked with have found that the pressures change. The responsibilities or the tasks will change, but the pressures change too. And it's pretty unusual to say, boy, this was all great, except for those that are doing this as a transition into their own retirement. I would just exercise caution for those that are considering, and the consideration of to what extent do you want to involve what may be best, not only for yourself, but for the other partners as well as the patient community aspect of the decision as well. And I recognize it's tough to be on your own or to be an independent practice, rather when we're in an environment where there's so many mergers that are going on. But those are the types of things that will trouble people as they go through those types of experiences.
I think
Long
that
term, the long term view that we take, and having spoken about practice mergers and getting big over the past, one of the things to consider is not the first contract you get with an acquirer, but what will the second contract look like? And I think that's the reason that you're finding a lot of people who may initially be very pleased with a buyout after a couple of years no longer are. We all got people we all know who have sold out to private equity, and their experiences have certainly been financially positive at the beginning. It's really down the road a couple of years that I wonder what things are going to look like, both for them, for their practices, for their patients, and for their entire communities. It's a different model. It's not what we're used to. That doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that it's different, and we need to tread carefully when we go different.
I think these private equity deals are more of a payout. So you give me money, make me happy for a little bit, learn from me how to manage, and then get rid of me. You want me gone as quick as possible because I am a problem. And I won't work as hard. That's a guarantee. I'll come in, I'll come out, or they want to replace you. And they expect the physician to continue to produce the way he's producing. But I learned once a physician checks out psychologically from a practice, they're finished. They retired.
We do what we do for a lot of reasons, and earning an income is only one of those reasons, and a fairly small one. We're in this and we're committed to taking care of the patients who trust us. And anybody who's not medical doesn't come into running a practice from that same point of view. The private equity people, like you said, Herb, are in this for a 5-year turnaround. They're investing money up front. They want to see a good return on that money when they turn around. And if that involves cutting the expenses, meaning cutting the expense of physicians and replacing them with people who cost less to provide care, that is what they will do. They don't have the same commitment that you do when you're in a profession such as medicine.
One thing that, if I may share an example that a client mentioned to me a few months ago when we were together, and he thought, Ron, this sums it up pretty well. Do they refer to me as a physician anymore?
No.
Do they call me a doctor? No. You know what they call me? A provider. And I don't want to be called a provider. I'm not. I am a doctor. I am skilled at what I do. And it just...
by design.
Yeah, of course. It's an indicator of how that's going. And again, does that mean, there are a greater number of people that are now receiving healthcare that weren't receiving? Yeah, I'm sure there's statistics somewhere that would say this model makes a ton of sense.
Mm-hmm.
But when you address the things that you've mentioned of why you're in medicine, you're not in medicine because that's the way that you want to make money. There are easier ways to make money than to be a pediatrician. The hours you work, the risks you take, the education you had to go through. It's not just because you wanted to make a good living. There were so many other reasons, or at least that's what we've seen from our clients. And it sounds that way as well from you gentlemen as well.
But
another thing that I've noticed with private equity when they take over organizations, they move the practice to a different location. So you get rid of the leader, then you displace the practice to another place. So you remove the thing that people would go to, the doctor to that place.
Yeah.
And then that's how they have complete control.
So to wrap up the private equity conversation, every dance takes 2 people, maybe 3 sometimes, right? And so if you're at the end of your career and either you don't have any partners, there are some practices where there's a solo owner, or your partners don't want to do the day-to-day, the equation starts changing. What's best for the community? If I retired as I am and nobody else is going to manage the practice, they won't survive. The community won't have any care. And that's a problem I think we're facing more and more because the younger physicians are not interested in being what us older physicians think about what your responsibilities are as not only even before you make it as a partner in a group, you are responsible for that practice and those patients and to make sure that the bills get paid. And I don't think that exists today in our younger workforce.
Jesse, why do you think your younger partners did not want to engage in the management of the practice? They weren't capable. They weren't interested. What was that? Because they're physicians, they could figure anything out.
I think one partner, you've seen one partner. And I had one who said he just wanted to put on blinders and see patients, and that's all he wanted to do. I had another who, anytime there was a frustration with something, with a problem developing, his response was just to throw up his hands and close the door in his office rather than work to solve the problem. So a lot of it is personality. We've gone out, all of us have gone out and solved problems when we needed to. We've taken risks. We've gone into the unknown, trusting our abilities to figure out a way out on the other side. Not everybody looks at things that way. And it's when you've got a practice that's running smoothly and is paying you well, you're okay with the status quo and you don't learn what you need to learn. We've all learned practice management by being self-taught. That's not something they teach you in school. Yeah. We have gotten to where we are, and each of us being in similar but different situations, we have gotten to where we are by teaching ourselves the ropes and by taking chances. And not everybody has that kind of risk. And I call it risk taking. It's not necessarily a real risk, but not everybody has the ability to go into an unknown situation and figure out a new way to solve it. It's just different personalities, different people.
Jess, I want to touch this because I think it's so important. And we said it a couple of times. One must always cultivate a life outside the exam room. And that should start early, right?
Most of us have had other interests, but I find that getting involved with starting and building a practice takes precedence, and those other interests often fall by the wayside. It's important to have other interests, and they could be absolutely anything. A lot of what I've done outside the exam room is what I call medicine adjacent. It's related to the practice of pediatrics, but it's not the direct clinical practice. And I like sharing my expertise and using it that way. But at the same time, I've had other activities that have occupied my time over the years that have provided a welcome break where I could absolutely go out and just have an afternoon without thinking about medicine at all. And that's a question of, like I say, taking chances, taking risks, and just exploring something new and not necessarily knowing where it's going to go.
Jess, and I'm asking this because it is how it feels to me. How fast does time run?
Oh, there's never enough time.
Isn't it? I don't know if you feel like I feel, but I still think I just finished residency last year.
When I look back at practicing for 41 years, I agree with you. 41 years is a heck of a lot of time. You can put some markers on it. I've had a few 3-generation families where somebody I started taking care as a teenager had their kids, and then their kids had kids. And when you look at it in those terms, it really shows you what 41 years of practice can be. But you're right. You're in it and you're doing it day to day and you enjoy it and you're happy to go to work each day, and the time does fly. And unfortunately, we've all got a limited amount of time and nobody knows what that limit is going to be. So it's really important to squeeze the joy out of life during your career, but especially be prepared to do it when you're in retirement.
And Ron, you had a wonderful explanation about how you go through with your clients, checking into their values. But how do you communicate to them the importance that time will fly before you know it? You will be 70 because it happens to all of us unless we die before that.
Great question. I think the one way that we've been successful with that is asking those same questions as they may have related to family that came before them. Tell me about, what'd your father do? How did you get into medicine? What was it that got you excited about medicine? And that the response could have been because my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, they were all involved. Or it could be, they're so proud of me. I'm the first one in my family to have graduated from college. And I wanted to help the community. And I love science, whatever that may be. And then trying to put that into a perspective of just how did that perspective of that other generation approaching this, how might that influence you? And how quickly do you think would that be important for you to instill in your children or going forward? And trying to relate the idea of what was the experience of those that came before you and how quickly was your time with them and how impactful was your time? And then just the idea of how would you measure that? I think of people that were important to my life and how they passed away when I was relatively young. And I look back and say, gee, I wonder what they would be thinking now if I had a conversation with them today. But it helps to put in perspective the idea of things that are a little bit greater than the patient chart or the schedule that you have to keep with your family to say, oh, we've got to run here or do that or whatever, and help them to consider some of these more important things. And again, the idea of even just as simple as how quickly does it feel that you just graduated from medical school and you started your residency? And it was just like yesterday, as I think George said, but just it happened so quickly. No matter what stage they are, they seem to have that same reaction. And that's a great benchmark, if you will, to tie them into a perspective of time.
Yeah, I remember when I was early career physician, My father used to yell at me all the time, slow down, spend time at home, go on vacation with the kids, because before you know it, those kids are big. So I coached soccer. I took the kids everywhere. We went on a lot of vacations. I don't think I missed a lot. I was there like 90% of the time.
That's good. Yeah, that's excellent. Jess, what are in your mind the 4 stages of retirement? So you saved money, you handed over the management role for someone else in the practice, and now you're on to the next thing, your next gig. What are those 4 areas you think are happen once you retire?
The concept of the 4 stages of retirement is an idea that a gentleman named Riley Moynes pointed out in a TED Talk, and he's an educator and a financial planner. And he talked about the 4 stages. The first stage of retirement is what I call the vacation stage. It's the no alarm clock, no schedule, get up when you want to, do what you want to do, and life is great. It's like being on vacation, but it's extended. And that can last somebody anywhere from a couple of months to maybe as long as a year. But for all of us pretty much in that situation, we eventually get to the point of the second stage, which is what I think of as the "is that all there is" stage. Even being on the greatest vacation in the world, for people like ourselves who have been driven and practiced at a high level and remained educated and continued to study and advance ourselves, after a while, we look for more than just a vacation. The second stage is when you've lost your autonomy, you've lost your sense of power, you've lost your sense of being respected in the community because you're no longer out there in the role that you had played. And so there's a sense of loss during phase. Now, if you're lucky, you move on into the third stage where you pull yourself up and say, I'm not going to have a pity party here, and I'm going to go out and find something new to do. And you cast around for new things that might be your interest, whether it's volunteer work or whether it's taking up a second career, something unrelated to medicine, or whether it's travel or exercise or giving back in some other way. That third stage is where you look at for something that is rewarding to you, that is stimulating, that's a reason to get up every day and go out. And if you're really lucky, you get to the fourth stage, which is where you've found something that's fully engaging, that's rewarding, that satisfies you, and keeps you real happy to be, as he says, squeezing the joy out of every day of retirement. And that fourth stage is the one that we don't all get to. Unfortunately, retirement can be shorter due to illness or disability or death than some of us would like, and we don't necessarily get there. So the 4 stages it's a repeatable thing that you see if you look at people around. And we all know those people who are retired and who really don't seem to have a purpose in what they're doing. But I think that we can improve on that concept by trying, and this is the point of preparation. If we plan early on, knowing who we are, what interests us outside of medicine, what rewards us, we can enjoy the vacation stage, but at the same time, we can be getting into those things that we found rewarding as side events during our career. And we can skip that second and third stage of casting around and trying things out for satisfaction. If you've had things that satisfied you during your career, and you can continue to do them, you can move into that fourth stage where you're really happy with where you are and you're satisfied and fulfilled. And you can move into that stage without the trauma of feeling adrift and lost. So that's the reason that I talk about planning, about knowing who you are, about knowing what satisfies you and fulfills you all through your career. Because if you choose to retire, you'll want to be there as quickly as possible to make the most of your retirement years.
So, Ron, there must be different financial implications during the vacation time. There must be a lot of cash going out the door.
Yes, the most direct. But when planned for and anticipated, it makes sense. And to add to Jesse's comment, there's also basically what we have seen as like a cycle of renewal. And the successfully retired if they haven't already identified some of those aspects of what their retired life will look like, they too can go through that cycle of enjoying that vacation period, spending a lot more than they might have. But then there comes a time where it's like, how many more times do we want to go to Europe? How many more times do we want to deal with an airport? How many times do I want to spend 2 days in the car to go visit my cousins or my children or my grandchildren? I love them, but, and that reaches that point of saying, gee, to what extent do I want to get involved? And maybe I should start thinking, and cocooning is the term that's often used to say, I'm going to just hunker down and start to review what types of things might I want to do. That may precede the trial and error aspect of trying different things and then really finding it and then going for it. And then the cycle can begin again. And they're going for it. And then they may say, I need to take my foot off this accelerator a little bit. I need another vacation period. I may begin to cocoon again. And we've seen that happen with people as well. So it's a kind of a circular issue as opposed to a linear type of approach. But again, all concepts make sense. What has been surprising to so many clients is that when we did financial projections for them, what they would look like 10 years or 20 years into retirement, if we did those 20 years ago, they say, gee, I thought I'd be spending a lot more money in my 20th year of retirement. I'm not, because I'm not taking those trips. I'm not replacing that car that frequently. I'm just enjoying what my life is about now. And it's not about how much money I can spend or all the things I need to do. I've been there. We have friends that they vacation to every continent on the planet. They enjoy it. But when you've done it once, do they really need to go doing it again? And that becomes an issue in there. So we have found that oftentimes, in spite of inflation projections that will factor in, spending actually begins to level off. And in some cases, it can begin to decrease. The exception to that, added healthcare costs that can come into play for sure. That's another aspect that can be anticipated and factored into the numbers that are crunched once you know what's important to the individual as well. Long-winded answer for talking about that, but yep, vacation spends a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
And Ron, to summarize it, what would be your advice to a physician that's starting out in the labor force today regarding financial planning and looking forward to his retirement?
I think by far the most important thing is to address things early and don't postpone what's so important to do. And if you have a lot of time to prepare for something and only a little bit of money, or what may be perceived as a little bit of money, you can still accomplish great things. If you don't have a lot of time, you better have a lot of money to be able to accomplish great things. So if time's on your side, leverage that, plan that, think about that. And it's not brain surgery. It's basic stuff. Get a budget. No organization that's worthwhile runs without a budget. Why shouldn't you? Get into that habit of just watching where things are going. And if you don't want to keep a budget, a detailed budget, don't. Just make certain that you're setting aside the amount of money that you need to set aside to reach the goal that you need to have. It's relatively simple to do. Just think of what it is that you need to spend to do the things you'd like to do. How much would you travel? How much would you gift? How much would you spend just to live your basic life? Inflate that number and then divide that number, subtract from that number what you think Social Security will be, and divide that number by 4%. And that'll give you a roughly right number that you should save towards. And if that's all you do, you've probably done more than most physicians have done to prepare for their retirement, because most physicians spend a lot more time planning for their next vacation than they do for their financial independence. And that's disappointing to hear, but we've seen that happen so many times. And they spend a lot more time planning for a wedding than they do for a vacation, than for their retirement. Start early, most important thing, and do some of the basic steps. Work with someone if it makes sense, or get the knowledge so you can do these things on your own. It's not that difficult.
How about you, Joe?
If you don't want to do the calculations, the one thing I can do is maximize your retirement plan savings, whether it's an IRA or a 401k or an employer plan. Even when it may seem like a stress, a financial stress early on in your career. Start putting away the maximum amount you can early on, because compounding works magic. I know it's said all the time and it sounds trite, but if you start early, you'll do a lot better off. And the same goes for insurance. You need disability insurance. You'll eventually need long-term care insurance. You want to think about your health insurance for later on, even with Medicare. But these are simple steps. They don't require any kind of detailed understanding or knowledge. If you have the opportunity to maximize your savings, I think that's the big part for the financial aspect. As far as the other part, again, I can't say it often enough. Remember that, yeah, you're a physician and you're dedicated to taking care of your patients, but you're also a person and you need to be equally dedicated in taking care of yourself. And that involves understanding who you are. It involves understanding where you want to go. It involves understanding what rewards you and what satisfies you in addition to practicing medicine. Because if you start thinking about that early, and you may change your interests, but that's okay. As long as you're building other interests and investigating other interests, it goes a long way to being prepared for eventually being retired.
Yeah. Yeah, the younger physicians, unfortunately, they think they're invincible and everything is good for the future. Like, we get this own occupation disability insurance for our younger physicians. It's paid for, it's not a problem. And then they move on. They can take this policy with them. All they have to do is pay the bill. I have yet to meet one that took it with them. They just let it go. I have the staff, 401ks, they don't really want to get involved with it. They're 20-something years old. So why should I put money away? That's crazy. I can tell you some stories of friends that I went to school with that did take disability on occupation, and they're our age, Herb, and they're out, back pain, some rheumatological problems. They're not working. They should be working.
That's the story of life, right?
Yeah.
You get sick, you die.
They were at least smart enough to do it. Somebody told them to do it when they were younger, for who knows what happens in the future. Have disability insurance. Don't use it. Pray that you don't need to use it.
Who come up against bad outcomes all the time. You'd think we would learn from our experience professionally. But unfortunately, you're right, George. A lot of people don't, and they do think they're invincible. But that's common when you're younger. It's only as you get older that you realize none of us will get out of here alive.
So far, the calendar always wins. The calendar is undefeated.
Yeah.
Yep. That was one of the most interesting things for me during medical school. Physicians are so smart, and you bet against the impossible. You can't save every patient. You can't defeat every disease. And eventually, you can't save yourself, and the calendar wins.
Wow.
And that's just what it is. But we still go in there and we try to fix it every day.
Yeah. Words of inspiration.
Let's not be downers here. I've got to say, speaking from retirement, it's a wonderful thing. And I'm happy because I planned for it. And there was things as I came to retirement that I didn't realize I had planned for. And then there were other things that I could have planned better. But just thinking about it early on is really the key to enjoying it. And I like I say, I'm retired and I highly recommend it.
I also read that what matters is a dash, that little dash in between your birthday and the time that you die.
Right.
What you do with that dash is what's really important. So, gentlemen, Jess,
thank you.
It's a pleasure to talk to you both again. Hopefully, we'll get the chance to meet somewhere warm soon. Have a meal together, because I so enjoy your company and insights.
A lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Look forward to it. Thank you so much. This has been a real treat, and it is a pleasure to meet you all. And I admire the work you've done in the past. And it's because of people like you, actually, that's the reason why I'm in the business that I'm in, because our family physician, he wasn't a pediatrician at that time. This was 60 plus years ago, was a gentleman from Germany who came to the United States, practiced medicine. Our family became friends with his family. It was great. We spent time together socially. And when I was about 12, the physician passed away unexpectedly. his family had to move back to Germany to live with other family because he didn't do planning. And he didn't do the things that he needed to do as far as laying a groundwork, taking care of those hazards, or preparing for a retirement that obviously he never saw. And I thought, how could a person who I always thought was so smart, so clever, and so easy to be with and had so much knowledge not take care of these things? I said, I've got to do something about that. Now, that was a long time ago, but it stuck with me. And I admire the work you do, the education you have, the risks you take, and the people you serve. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ron. That's very nice.
Thank you.
We do appreciate what you do for physicians across the country, too.
It's our pleasure. But thanks for this opportunity as well. This is a lot of fun. I hope folks enjoy listening.
Great to share our experiences, and it's great to help future generations of physicians. We all started out somewhere, and we all passed through the career course. And I think if we can share our experiences to make it easier or smoother or more satisfying or more fulfilling for our colleagues coming up, I think that's a really important part of our role. It's educating the future physicians in a whole lot of ways. It's not just about medicine.
Yeah,
No doubt.
we wish that when I was in early career, there was a podcast like this that would invite me to these things. I managed to deal with them over time by meeting different people, and they suggested this and that by accident. You know?
George, when you were early career, they barely had radio. Oh, come on.
Oh, hold still. Let me pull that arrow out of your chest.
All right. All right, gentlemen. Have a good day.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This has been a production of the Pediatric Lounge. On the show notes, you will find links to our co-host and other important notes, as well as a timetable of the topics discussed today. Don't forget to follow us on social media and subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcast. Leave us a great review, as it helps us greatly. In the meantime, we will see you next week. The Pediatric Lounge. The conversations are not intended as medical advice, and the opinions expressed are solely those of the host and the guest.